Hello, I am Alexander S. Bermange.
Marvelous. And then to start, I always go back to beginnings when I do my interviews. So, where did your
Very
kind of
good.
arts career begin?
Well, I suppose it began with my parents sitting me down at the piano when I was a lot younger and encouraging me to have piano lessons, and to my taking very well to the instrument, to deriving a lot of enjoyment from playing, and actually as much enjoyment from creating my own pieces as from replicating the works of the great masters. I had this creative urge in me. Maybe it stemmed back even further than that to when I used to far prefer drawing my own pictures to colouring in. And then my parents introduced me to theatre, to some of the big mega musicals in the West End in the first instance. And I just discovered that this fusion of drama and music and sometimes comedy, sometimes tragedy, uh, really spoke to me. And I took it upon myself to create my own first musical, which I put on at school and then at university, and then just kept writing, and ended up doing it professionally.
Yeah. And then, were there any kind of people or performances that had that big impact on you that kind of decided this was it for you?
Um, Certainly in terms of performances, um, the works of Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber were the first shows that I was exposed to when I was younger. So productions of Cats and Starlight Express, and particularly chess, in actual fact, really woke my passion back in the early days of my interest in the genre. I know, especially in the instance of chess, looking back on it, it's quite surprising because it's quite intricate, it's quite political,
Yeah.
it's very much about relationships. There's a lot in it that I'm sure would have gone over my head at the time, but I think part of the intrigue is that it didn't actually occur to me that it was going over my head, and I suppose I've come to realize that that's actually quite a good example of a show that can work on multiple levels and that can speak to someone whether they get all of the nuances or not. If they don't necessarily realize that they are missing out on some. So I think those were really the pieces that shaped my formative years, and that then led to my discovering a much broader range of shows and writers.
Marvelous. And then, for anyone who's not come across you, how would you describe your own writing style?
Oh, well, that's an excellent question, because I do try very hard to adapt my writing style to whatever particular project I'm working on,
Good.
depending on the tone of the piece, the time period which it's set in, the place it's set in, the vision of the production, any preferences my collaborators or other members of the creative team may have if they're on board at an early stage. Many people who know my work will know me for my comedic writing. Um, I've written a lot of comedic songs for the BBC, be it for Radio 4 or the World Service. I've had my comic songs recorded by the likes of Miriam Margolyes and Christopher Biggins and Nigel Planer and many greats of the West End stage. And by virtue of those facts, and I guess also the fact that recently I was involved in the creation of the Spitting Image musical in Birmingham in the West End. And because all of the above screams comedy, many people who know my work will associate it most with that as a style. Having said that, many of my other pieces have embraced much darker themes. ranging from the show set against the backdrop of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is the closest the world has ever come to nuclear catastrophe, or at least pre this year, I should say.
Yes.
And many other pieces have been more serious and less light-hearted. So I guess it has depended on the project, but I think purely because perhaps there are fewer writers out there writing comedic material, that's probably what I'm best known for, at a guess.
Yeah. And then on to I Wish My Life Were a Musical. Where did the kind of inspiration originally come to write that?
Well, it actually came from various sources. One really defining moment was a number of years ago when a show of mine was being performed on a cruise. And I was on the ship for a couple of weeks, pretty much every night of which I would dine with the cast members and creatives. And I'd always be struck by the frequency with which other passengers would gravitate towards our table and ply our cast members with no end of questions about their day-to-day lives, not so much their experiences on stage, sometimes their experiences on stage, but primarily what went on behind the scenes, the audition process, what happened when they toured the country. I found that a lot of these lay people, if I may call them that, often had very well-meaning but misguided preconceptions about the lives of performers, that they might be ferried from their front door to the stage door in a chauffeur-driven limousine, even if they were the lowliest chorus member, or perhaps even that they might get put up in luxurious five-star hotels when they were going around the country in a show that's on tour, rather than having to slum it in rather less prepossessing digs. And that was really one of the key things that made me think maybe there's the germ of an idea in a show that can really lift the lid on what it's like to be a musical theatre performer, that can expose some of these innermost secrets of the musical theatre world in all its horrendous glory, but presenting what can often be negative experiences, be it the awful auditions or the debilitating dance routines or the mid-performance mishaps or the backstage backstabbing, taking those negatives but putting a comedic spin on them. And I figured that if I did it right, it could potentially be relatable for industry people, revelatory to people not familiar with the industry, and hopefully very funny to both sets of people.
Yes. And then, I guess, as I say, it's different for each show, but what's the writing process like for this particularly? Was it the story came first, or was it the songs, or was it a mix of both?
Well, it was kind of a mix of both, purely because a few of the songs came first, and then the story did, and then the rest of the songs did. Because a few of the songs, and this is actually the other thing that led to the creation of the show, several years ago, I started doing live performances of my own comedic songs. Now, up until then, I'd only really performed them in the comfort of radio studios where no one could see me. Millions of people could hear me, but no one was watching me. But there'd been a fair bit of demand for some live performances so that people could see me, hear me in action. So I did a string of them, but in order to break it up a bit and to create a bit of variety, I enlisted some of my chums who'd appeared in musicals that I'd written to do some guest spots. And I didn't want these performances to just be songs from my musicals. I wanted them to be largely showcasing my comedic material. And so what I did was I wrote some bespoke comedic material for these musical theatre artists, guests of mine, to perform. And I thought, well, what can I write for them? And I thought, well, they're musical theatre performers. Why don't I write a few comedic songs about being a musical theatre performer? And those songs were so well received that that experience, combined with the cruise experience that I just outlined, led to the creation of the show. And that's when I figured, okay, what are the key stages in a performer's professional life? If we start with the wide-eyed drama student and we end with the brattish diva, or the past it chorus member, or the bitter has-been, or the never was, what is there along the way? They're the endless auditioning, the knackering dance routines, the understudying, the onstage kisses, the divas, the crazy fans. And once I'd come up with those benchmarks along the way, it was really a case of filling in the gaps and then providing some interlinking narrative, so that there was the sense of development that we were going right through a performer's career.
Yes, and then we're talking now ahead of the show returning this summer, but obviously you've had it run kind of 2 or 3 productions now, when it's had amazing reviews, like 5 stars across the board. Is there ever a temptation to go back and tweak anything ahead of a new run?
Well, we often do, in actual fact. And last year, which was the show's 3rd Edinburgh season and also its 3rd London season, we actually thought we'd broaden the scope of the piece. So in addition to revealing everything you could want to know about being a musical theatre performer, if only there were any who would admit it, we decided we'd also try and show the audience everything about the devotees, detractors, and disruptors who said performers perform too. So with a few additional songs, we endeavoured to provide a bit of a glimpse into the lives of those in the audience, the super fans, the secret fans, the musical theatre haters who've been dragged there, those who keep talking or texting or stuffing their faces or singing along during performances, which certainly seems to have been a bit of a hot topic of late. So yes, the exciting thing about it being a musical revue rather than a conventional musical is there is scope to introduce new songs, to make each iteration ever so slightly different. And in fact, each of the show's outings in London and Edinburgh, as well as the productions in Switzerland and Canada and South Korea that have been mounted over the last few years, they've all actually been subtly different, which is very nice, because it means that every time you put the show on, as well as hopefully bringing the audience the best of what's worked before, you can integrate some new elements which audiences for each new version are experiencing for the first time.
Yes, and you probably get asked this question a lot, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If your own life was a musical, what would you call it?
Well, I would call it Merrily We Roll Along, which has been taken by the great Stephen Sondheim. But there is a very specific reason why I would want my musical to be like Merrily We Roll Along, and that is because, as any musical theatre devotees listening will know, that's a show which tells the story in reverse. It starts at the end and works its way forward back to the beginning, I should say, if that makes sense. So you start with the characters as kind of mature individuals, and then by the end of the show, you've also seen them in the full burst of youth. And I've always thought it would be very nice to start one's life with the frailties, challenges, obstacles, everything else that goes along with old age, and have the excitement and romance and looks of youth to look forward to, rather than it being the other way around. It seems a cruel and unusual punishment that we get the good times and all the blessings that youth brings us right at the beginning. So there's only the difficulties to look forward to, if indeed look forward to were the right expression. So I think I'd ideally want my life to replicate the structure, if not the content, of Merrily We Roll Along, in terms of starting with old age and finishing with the joys of youth.
Yes. And then you can't pick your own for this question because that would be cheating. But if you were stranded on a desert island and you could take 3 musical theatre soundtracks, what would you be taking with you?
Wow. Well, first, I would never dream of picking my own. I don't really listen to my own material unless I have to for professional reasons. I far prefer just using that time to expose myself to writers or shows that I don't know yet, or finding new nuances in shows I already have. This is a really, really, really hard question. So 3 cast albums.
Yes.
Okay. Which is, it's not necessarily going to be my 3 favorite musicals.
No.
But 3 cast albums. Okay. Off the top of my head, and I'm sure that I will go away regretting these choices in some shape or form. The first would be Jesus Christ Superstar. Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice had such a major impact on my early life in terms of my experiencing and enjoying their shows. Tim Rice in particular has been kind enough to being a very vocal champion of my work, for which I will always be eternally grateful. Jesus Christ Superstar is a piece in which they combine their forces, take the most unlikeliest of subject matters, tackle these characters who've acquired these truly mythic proportions and simply treat them as human beings. It's surprisingly short. It covers a surprising amount of ground. I think they were both at the peak of their powers, and when collaborating with each other, they were dynamite.
Yeah.
Now, number 2 is almost certainly going to surprise people, and it is a bit of a cheat. I am a massive fan of Jim Steinman, who was, in my opinion, a songwriter unlike any other songwriters, not best known for writing musicals, although he did write several, but none of which I believe have been staged in the UK apart from one, which was Bat Out of Hell, which was kind of a compilation of many of his greatest hits. And because it was a compilation of many of his greatest hits, and it did engender a cast album, that is also one of the cast albums I would take, because it would give me an opportunity to have ready access to those incredible songs, which are so theatrical. Many of them, like Objects in a Rearview Mirror, may appear closer than they are, which is perhaps my favorite of his songs, are almost like mini musicals in themselves. So I would take that. I mean, Bat Out of Hell 2 would possibly be my Desert Island album, but since you've asked me for 3, and since you've asked me for cast albums, I think Bat Out of Hell would enable me to fill that slot. Now, the third one is really, really, really hard, because there are numerous that are kind of jostling for position. 2 in particular, and I think I've decided on it. Before I do, I'm going to give honorable mentions to Stephen Schwartz and Alan Menken, who aren't going to feature in these top 3. And the third one is also a bit of a cheat, but it's because although I love musicals, I love all sorts of music. So if I were stranded on a desert island with only 3 albums, I'm not sure I'd actually want 3 musicals. Although you've so I need to take 3 cast albums, so they do need to be musicals. But I think the third one, perhaps because it is fresh in my mind, because it's had so much publicity recently, owing to a very, very notable anniversary. I'm probably going to say Mamma Mia, because I think Benny and Bjorn were masters of their craft. I think if you were stuck on a desert island, you'd want something like ABBA to either cheer you up or make you indulge in your own sorrows. And the thing that I guess the Mamma Mia cast album would do would really enable me to, experience the joy of all those great ABBA songs on an island. And hey, Mamma Mia is set on an island. So I think those would be my three. Now, if the question had been even slightly different, like if I could have three musicals performed on the desert island, or if I could take three libretti to the desert island, I'm sure I would have given slightly different answers, not least because the great Stephen Sondheim would undoubtedly have featured in that. I mean, Old Friends, for example, is one of the most magnificent showcases of any writer's creative output that I've experienced in a long time. But since you have asked me for three cast albums, then I will indulge my own passions and guilty pleasures by probably selecting those three.
Great choices, though. Good, solid, nice mix as well. It's quite nice.
Controversial, perhaps, but hey, honest.
Hey, that's the best way. But then,
but funnily enough, will surprise many people who like I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, because in many ways those are nothing like the style of this show. But then again, in other ways they are. So I can only be honest, I suppose.
Of course. And at this point of your career, what kind of keeps you inspired to be creative and create new work?
I suppose seeing work of mine continuing to be produced, continuing to meet great collaborators, be they other creatives or exciting performers, and also just going to see things that really inspire me. Every so often I'll see something that takes me back to how I first felt those goosebumps running up my arm when I discovered my initial love of musical theatre. So I suppose it's all of those things.
Yes. And my final question is the easiest one for you. What do you want an audience member to take away from seeing I Wish My Life Were a Musical?
I would like them to think that they have learned a lot, laughed a lot, and will go away with a renewed appreciation of what it's like to be a musical theatre performer, as well as with some very happy memories of being made to laugh so much at some of the horrors that said performers go through.
Marvellous. Alexander, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, bless your heart. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
I mean, lead me to say before you do go is the show is on in Manchester, London, Cork and Ireland, then the Edinburgh Fringe, then Newbury, Wolverhampton and Winchester, touring in July and August, those dates.
That is correct. And if I may be so bold as to say that lots of further information and clips can be found at likeamusical.com. And there is also the imminent release of a selection of tracks to look forward to for people who would like to have a listen. So people might want to keep their eyes on that website or on the various social media platforms that the show is on. They just need to search for I Wish My Life Were Like a Musical, and hopefully they will be richly rewarded.